Hey there, and welcome to Brada Tales. Tonight, we bring you a chilling collection of horror stories set against the soothing sound of rain. Before we dive into suspense, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. If these stories send shivers down your spine, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get comfortable, let the fear slowly take over, and tell us if you enjoy this kind of storytelling. Now sit back and relax, we're about to begin. It all started with a question. A simple one. But once it entered my mind, it began to echo and grow until it consumed me entirely. What if they were all hiding something? It was like a shadow, always lurking at the edge of my thoughts. The small things, the little inconsistencies, they seemed harmless at first. But now, looking back, I realized they were always there, waiting for me to notice. The neighborhood where I lived was quiet. Too quiet. Most people kept to themselves. Families, friends, neighbors, you would pass them on the street and exchange polite greetings. It was one of those suburban areas where everything seemed to be perfectly in place. Neat lawns, tidy houses, the sound of children playing in the distance. But beneath the surface, something was wrong. I could feel it in the air. It wasn't until that evening that I first noticed it. I had just come home from a long day at work and was walking up the driveway when I heard it. A soft rustling sound, like someone was moving around in the bushes near my house. I stopped, frozen for a moment, listening. Nothing. I could have sworn I heard something, but when I looked, there was no one there. I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just a stray animal, a cat or a raccoon. The neighborhood had its fair share of wildlife. But as I continued inside, a gnawing sense of unease settled in my stomach. It wasn't just the sound, it was something else. A feeling, a sense of being watched. Later that night, as I sat in my living room, the sound came again. Faint at first, like something scraping against the wooden fence in the backyard. I turned the volume down on the TV and listened. There it was again, a soft rustling. It was strange, something about the way it moved didn't sound natural. Too deliberate. I stood up, walking to the back door. My mind raced with possibilities. Could it be the wind? No, the trees were still. Something was off. My eyes scanned the dark yard, the shadows playing tricks in the dim light. I stepped outside, my heart pounding in my chest. The cold air hit me like a slap, sending a shiver down my spine. But there was nothing. No movement. No sound. Just the silent night stretching endlessly before me. I turned back inside, feeling foolish for even entertaining the thought that something might be wrong. I tried to shake it off, but as I lay in bed that night, the sensation lingered. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The rustling, the feeling of being watched. Then, over the next few days, more things began to happen. Small things. The neighbor's car that had been parked in the same spot for days, never moving. A strange light flickering in the window of the house 2 doors down, even though no one seemed to be home. The dog across the street barking at nothing, a low, constant growl in the middle of the night. I couldn't explain it. But the more I observed, the more I realized that something was wrong. It wasn't just the little things, it was the way everyone acted. It was like they were all pretending everything was normal, pretending nothing had changed. The most unsettling part was how it felt like no one else was noticing. My friends, my coworkers, even my own family, they all seemed oblivious. And that was the part that scared me the most. Why didn't anyone else see it? Why did it feel like I was the only one who knew something wasn't right? One evening, while out for a walk, I bumped into Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman who lived next door. She was standing by her mailbox, staring down the street, her eyes wide. She didn't acknowledge me at first, as though lost in thought. When I greeted her, she jumped slightly, as though startled, and gave me a tight-lipped smile. "Good evening, dear," she said, her voice trembling. "Is everything okay?" I asked, noticing how pale her face looked. "Oh, yes. Just a little tired, that's all," she replied quickly, almost too quickly. She gave a nervous laugh, but it sounded forced. I could see it in her eyes. The fear, the same feeling that had been growing inside me for days. "You sure?" I pressed. She nodded, but before she could say anything more, her gaze shifted to the street behind me. Her eyes widened and she quickly turned and shuffled back into her house, leaving me standing there, feeling unsettled. It was then that I began to realize Mrs. Thompson wasn't the only one. I had seen the same look on other faces, too. A nervous glance, a hurried movement, a sense of discomfort that no one was willing to acknowledge. They were hiding something, and whatever it was slowly but surely consuming them. That night I couldn't sleep. The rustling sound had returned, but this time it was louder. Closer. It wasn't just the bushes anymore. It was coming from behind the fence, from the alleyway that ran behind the row of houses. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination. But deep down, I knew I couldn't escape it. And that's when I heard it. A soft whisper, barely audible, but enough to make my skin crawl. "Away, seeing you." It came from somewhere in the dark, just beyond my backyard. My blood ran cold. I froze, listening, but there was no more sound. No movement. Just the quiet hum of the night. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up, my mind racing. What was going on? What were they hiding? Why did it feel like the walls around me were closing in? The next day, I decided to do something about it. I had to know the truth. I had to uncover the source of the fear that was spreading through my neighborhood like a virus. Something wasn't right, and I wasn't going to stop until I found out what it was. And so I began to watch. I started watching. Every day, every night, I kept my eyes peeled, scanning every corner of the neighborhood. The sounds, the strange behaviors, everything seemed connected in ways that I couldn't quite explain. My initial suspicion had transformed into a gnawing obsession. What was I missing? What were they hiding? It wasn't just the rustling or the strange whispers. The more I paid attention, the more I realized how everything was connected. The neighbors who never smiled anymore, the quick glances exchanged between them as if they shared a secret. The dog that never stopped barking, its eyes fixed on the same spot every night as though it were waiting for something. But what? I began to visit the houses of the people I'd known for years. Simple, casual visits. Small talk at first. But something was different this time. I was watching closely, listening for anything out of place. It was Mrs. Thompson again a few days after our awkward encounter. She was watering her garden when I walked by. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted the flowers in her flower bed. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Thompson," I said, trying to keep my tone light. She looked at me, her eyes darting to the street before returning to mine. She was trying to keep her voice steady. "How are you, dear? It's such a lovely day today, isn't it?" I nodded, but I could see the unease in her face, her lips pressed into a thin line. "It is, yes. But I couldn't help but notice you've been acting a little off lately. Is everything all right?" Her smile faltered, and she shifted her weight from one foot to the other. "Oh, I'm just tired, dear. You know how it is." Her eyes flickered over her shoulder as though someone was watching us. I was getting closer. I could feel it. Before I could press further, a car pulled into her driveway, a large black sedan that I didn't recognize. It was odd. Most people here drove the usual cars, sedans, minivans, nothing flashy. This car looked out of place. "Mrs. Thompson stiffened the moment she saw it. "Oh, excuse me, I must go inside." "I have something to take care of." Her voice was strained, almost panicked. She hurried inside, locking the door behind her. I didn't follow her inside, but I stayed outside, watching the car through the corner of my eye. The man who stepped out of the vehicle was tall, dressed in a dark suit. His face was obscured by dark sunglasses, even though it wasn't sunny. I couldn't make out his features, but something about him sent a chill through me. He knocked on Mrs. Thompson's door, and I saw her open it quickly, almost too quickly. The man spoke to her, but I couldn't hear their conversation from where I stood. After a few tense moments, he stepped back, and Mrs. Thompson shut the door firmly. The car drove off, leaving a trail of dust behind it. I couldn't shake the image of the man's face. Why had he been wearing those sunglasses? Why had Mrs. Thompson seemed so afraid? I knew something was wrong. There was no way I could ignore this anymore. That night I lay in bed, replaying the scene in my mind. The car, the stranger, Mrs. Thompson's fear. It all connected in a way I couldn't explain, but I knew it had to. There was something hidden in plain sight, and I was going to find out what it was. The next day, I decided to take a more direct approach. I had to know what was going on. I couldn't trust anyone in the neighborhood. Not anymore. They were all acting too strangely. I started to follow the man. I had seen him once, and I knew he wasn't just some random person passing through. He was too deliberate, too careful. The following morning I woke early, careful not to make a sound, and I watched the street from my window. I waited. Around noon, the black sedan pulled into the street again. My heart skipped a beat. This time the car stopped in front of another house, one I'd never paid much attention to before. It was a small, run-down house at the end of the street, near the old park that no one visited anymore. The lawn was overgrown and the windows were dark. It was the kind of place you'd pass by without a second thought. But not this time. I watched as the man got out of the car, this time without sunglasses. His face was just as unreadable as before, but now I could make out his features. A sharp jawline, eyes that didn't blink, too cold for comfort. I followed him at a distance, my pulse racing in my chest. As he approached the house, I saw a familiar face peer out from behind the curtains. It was Carl, the man who lived there. Carl was a quiet guy, never spoke much to anyone, but I knew him well enough to notice that something was different. His posture was tense, his movements jerky. The man at the door didn't wait for Carl to open it. He knocked once hard. Carl flinched, and after a moment, he opened the door just a crack. They exchanged a few words, and I strained to hear, but the wind carried their voices away. I didn't know what they were talking about, but the way Carl looked at the man. It was like he was scared. And I could see it in his eyes, that same fear that I'd seen in Mrs. Thompson. Something was happening in my neighborhood. Something terrible. I stayed in the shadows, watching as they spoke. After a few minutes, the man turned and walked back to the car, leaving Carl standing at the door. He looked around nervously before stepping back inside. I didn't know what to make of it, but I had a feeling that whatever they were hiding was bigger than I could imagine. I turned to leave, but as I did, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A voice, quiet, almost a whisper, but clear enough for me to hear. It came from the bushes by the street, from somewhere just behind me. We know you're watching. I froze. The words hung in the air like a threat, and for the first time since this had all started, I was scared. Whoever or whatever was behind all of this, it wasn't just the people in the neighborhood. It was something else. Something watching me. Something more. The words echoed in my head. We know you're watching. The voice was soft, but the meaning was sharp, like a blade cutting through the fog of confusion that had enveloped me. I turned quickly, but there was no one behind me. The street was empty, as it had always been, the silence broken only by the distant hum of traffic. My heart pounded, every nerve in my body firing in alerts. I took a step back, my eyes scanning the bushes, the trees, even the empty windows of the houses. But nothing moved. The voice had come from somewhere close, but there was no trace of its source. No figure lurking in the shadows. It was like it had come from the air itself, from the ground beneath my feet. Was I hearing things? Was this all just in my head? I didn't think so. There was something wrong in my neighborhood. Something I couldn't quite grasp, but I knew I needed to. I stood there for what felt like hours, trying to calm my breathing, trying to make sense of it. The sound of my heartbeat was deafening, drowning out the distant noises of the world around me. And then I heard it again, this time closer. A rustling in the bushes. I didn't need to turn to know what it was. Someone or something was there, watching me. I backed away slowly, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. My legs were heavy, like they were filled with lead, but I forced myself to move, walking in the direction of my house. I couldn't afford to look back. Not yet. When I reached my doorstep, I slammed the door shut behind me and leaned against it, trying to steady my breathing. I glanced out the window, hoping to see something, anything, to give me a clue about what had just happened. But the street was as calm as it always was. Too calm. I tried to shake off the feeling, to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't normal. The strange events, the fear in the eyes of my neighbors, it was all connected. Someone was hiding something, and they didn't want me to find out what it was. I couldn't let that go. Not anymore. That night, I decided to return to Carl's house. I needed answers, and I couldn't wait any longer. The man in the black sedan, the way Carl had reacted, I knew there was more to it. There had to be. I waited until the streets grew quiet, the usual sounds of the neighborhood fading into the darkness. I slipped out the back door, keeping to the shadows. The cold air bit at my skin, but I didn't care. My mind was set. When I arrived at Carl's house, I made sure to keep a safe distance. The lights inside were dim, the windows barely visible through the overgrown bushes. I crouched low, peeking through a crack in the blinds. From here, I could just make out Carl sitting at his kitchen table, his hands clasped together, his face drawn with exhaustion. But there was something else. Another figure. The tall man from the black sedan was in the kitchen with him. I could barely hear their conversation, but I could see Carl's eyes flicking nervously toward the door. He was sweating, his face pale. Whatever they were talking about, it was making him uneasy. I couldn't stay there forever. I needed to get closer. I moved silently around the back of the house, finding a spot near the window where I could hear their voices clearer. The words were low, almost unintelligible, but I managed to catch a few fragments. You know too much. We can't let you protect yourself. Carl's voice trembled. I haven't told anyone. I swear. I don't want any part in this. I just want to be left alone. The man's response was cold, measured. You don't have a choice. It's too late for that. A chill ran down my spine. What were they talking about? What was so dangerous that Carl was willing to plead for his life? And why had he been acting so strange lately? There was a connection here, I was sure of it. But the pieces weren't fitting together. Not yet. Suddenly Carl stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He turned toward the door as if someone had just knocked. His eyes widened in fear, and I instinctively ducked lower, praying he hadn't seen me. I waited, holding my breath. I heard the door open, but I didn't risk peeking out just yet. Instead, I crept further along the house, moving closer to the door. I needed to hear what was happening, needed to understand more. The conversation grew louder. Just leave, Carl said, desperation in his voice. I don't know anything. I can't help you. The man was silent for a long moment, then finally spoke again. You'll do what we say, or we'll make sure everyone knows the truth. The truth about you, about what you've done. I froze. What had Carl done? Before I could process the thought, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps moving away from the door. The man was leaving. I quickly moved to the side of the house and pressed myself against the fence, waiting for the car to drive away. Through a crack in the gate, I watched the man get into the black sedan and drive off. the engine roaring to life. Carl was still standing in the doorway. His face was pale, his body trembling. I could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear I had seen in Mrs. Thompson and in the others. They were all involved in something much bigger than I had realized. I didn't stay to confront him. Not yet. But one thing was clear. Whatever was happening in my neighborhood was far more dangerous than I had imagined. I turned back, feeling the weight of the darkness close in around me. The quiet, the stillness, the lies, it was all suffocating. And I was being pulled deeper into it, whether I liked it or not. Whoever was watching me, whoever was controlling everything from the shadows, they were always one step ahead. But I wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not when I was so close. I was going to find the truth. And I was going to make sure everyone knew it. The next morning, I woke with a sinking feeling in my chest. My mind replayed Carl's conversation with the man in the black sedan over and over again. The words kept echoing, "You'll do what we say," or "We'll make sure everyone knows the truth." The truth about you, about what you've done. I couldn't shake the image of Carl standing in the doorway, trembling as if he was about to lose everything. He wasn't just involved in something, he was desperate to escape it. But what was it? What truth was he hiding? I tried to focus. I needed answers, but I knew it wasn't going to be easy. It was like there was a web of deceit, and every time I tried to pull on one thread, it led me somewhere even darker. I couldn't trust anyone around me anymore. Not even my own friends. Everyone was a suspect. Everyone had something to hide. I walked down the street, my gaze shifting from one house to the next. Every window felt like it was watching me, every shadow hiding something I couldn't see. The calm, suburban street that had once felt so familiar now seemed like a trap. My phone buzzed in my pocket, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a message from Rachel, the one person who had always been a safe haven for me. She had no idea what was going on, no idea how deep the web went. But maybe, just maybe, she could help. "Hey, are you all right? You've been acting strange lately. I'm worried." I paused. The question seemed so simple, but in this context, it felt like a trap. Was she part of it? Was she asking because she knew something? Or was it just concern from a friend who didn't understand? I quickly typed back. "I'm fine. Just got a lot on my mind. We should catch up soon." I didn't want to drag her into this. Not yet. The last thing I wanted was to involve anyone else if I wasn't sure who was involved in what. But part of me knew I couldn't keep everything inside. I couldn't keep pretending that nothing was wrong. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I found myself pacing the house, thinking about Carl and the man in the black sedan. Every little detail from last night played over and over in my mind. My skin felt tight, as if something invisible was pressing down on me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't escape the sense that I was being watched. Later that afternoon, I decided to go back to Carl's house. I needed to know more. I couldn't let the fear of what might happen stop me. The truth was just out of reach, and I was going to find it. The neighborhood was quieter than usual as I made my way back, my footsteps echoing in the empty street. I felt a strange mix of dread and determination as I reached Carl's house. This time I wasn't going to hide in the shadows. I had to confront him. I had to know the truth. The front door was slightly ajar, which struck me as odd. Carl was paranoid. He would never leave the door open, not with everything that had been happening. I stood there for a moment, debating whether to go in. But the urge to uncover the mystery, to understand what was happening, overpowered my hesitation. I stepped inside. The house was dark, eerily quiet. The faint smell of stale coffee lingered in the air. I moved through the living room, the floor creaking under my feet. The house felt abandoned, as though Carl had just vanished in the middle of whatever had been going on. I made my way to the kitchen, where I had seen Carl and the man in the black sedan talking the night before. The table was still set with 2 empty cups, their surfaces stained with cold coffee. But there was something new. A piece of paper, half crumpled, was lying next to the cups. I reached for it, unfolding it carefully. The handwriting was messy, hurried, as though someone had written it under duress. You know what you have to do. The sooner you comply, the sooner it all ends. If you don't, we will take matters into our own hands. There's no escape. The truth will be revealed. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. This was the message that Carl had been so afraid of. But what did it mean? Who had written it, and why was Carl so terrified of the truth? I was interrupted by a soft noise behind me. My heart skipped a beat and I spun around, ready to confront whoever was there. But there was no one. The house was still, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the silence pressing down on me. I was about to leave when I noticed something strange. The window near the door was cracked open. I hadn't seen it like that before. A chill ran down my spine as I realized someone else had been here, someone who didn't want me to find out what was really going on. I pushed the window open wider, glancing outside. And there on the ground near the bushes, I saw something. A small, shiny object glinting in the sunlight. I reached down and picked it up, my fingers trembling. It was a key, but not just any key. This one was different, old-fashioned with intricate markings on it. Why would Carl have this? And why would someone leave it here? I stared at the key for a moment, trying to make sense of it. But I couldn't. I didn't know what to do with it, what it meant. It didn't fit into any of the pieces I had so far. But I knew one thing, it was important. I pocketed the key and headed for the door, my mind racing. Whoever was behind all this, whoever was controlling the strings, was watching me. They were always one step ahead, and now I was tangled in their web. But I wasn't going to stop. Not now. I had to find Carl. I had to find out what the key opened, and most of all, I had to learn what they were hiding. Because I was getting closer, and I could feel it. The truth was just within reach. The key was burning a hole in my pocket as I made my way home. Each step felt like it was carrying me closer to something I couldn't quite comprehend. My mind kept circling back to the same questions. What was Carl involved in? What was this truth that had everyone on edge? The moment I stepped inside my house, I felt it, the sense that something had shifted. It wasn't just the feeling of being watched, that gnawing sensation at the back of my mind. It was more than that. It was the oppressive silence that had taken over every corner of my home. The kind of silence that made your breath feel shallow, your movements too loud. I locked the door behind me and took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I wasn't alone in this. I couldn't be. I went straight to the kitchen, where I dropped the key onto the counter. My hands trembled as I examined it. The markings on it were foreign, unlike anything I had ever seen. They were etched into the metal, intricate designs that seemed almost symbolic. There had to be something more to this key than just opening a door. It felt like it was meant for something much more significant. The next step was clear. I needed to find out where it belonged. The question now was how. Carl had vanished. Whoever had left the note and the key for me had gone to great lengths to make sure I found it. They were playing a dangerous game, and I was their next piece on the board. I couldn't think straight. The pressure was starting to take its toll, the paranoia gnawing at me more with each passing minute. It was impossible to shake the feeling that someone was always a step ahead. I had to get answers, but the deeper I went, the more tangled the situation became. Was Carl in trouble? Had he known too much? Or was I simply being drawn into something much larger than I could handle? A sudden knock at the door broke my train of thought. My pulse quickened as I moved cautiously toward it. I wasn't expecting anyone. I peeked through the peephole and my heart skipped a beat. It was Rachel. I hadn't spoken to her since I sent that message earlier. She looked anxious, her eyes darting around nervously as if she knew she was being watched. I hesitated for a moment, unsure whether I should open the door. But something about her presence, the desperation in her expression, made me do it anyway. "Hey," she said softly as I opened the door, her voice laced with unease. "Why, I know something going on. You've been distant, and I saw something earlier, something I think you need to see." I raised an eyebrow, unsure of what she meant. "What do you mean?" She glanced around again before stepping inside. Her movements were swift, as if she feared someone might be following her. "You're not the only one who's been noticing strange things happening around here," she said in a hushed tone. I didn't want to bring it up before, but last night I saw Carl. He was acting weird. He was with someone I didn't recognize. And they were talking about something serious. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Who was he with?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Rachel shook her head. "I don't know, but it was obvious they weren't just talking. They were threatening him." I stiffened, the words hitting me like a slap in the face. Threatening him. What did they want from Carl? And why was she only telling me this now? "Why didn't you tell me before?" I asked, the frustration building in my voice. "I didn't know what to make of it," she admitted, her eyes cast downward. "But now I'm starting to think it's more than just a coincidence. I saw the same car from last night, the black sedan. It was parked down the street earlier, and the man inside. He was watching me." My stomach tightened at the thought. This was worse than I had imagined. Whoever was involved in this, they weren't playing games. They had power and they were making their moves one by one. Rachel's voice broke through my thoughts. I don't know what's going on, but I'm scared, okay? Something isn't right. I think they're watching me now, too. I could see the fear in her eyes. She wasn't just worried for me, she was worried for herself. The situation was spiraling out of control, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were both in way over our heads. "Do you think Carl's in danger?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Rachel nodded. "I don't know what to think anymore. But I've been looking into things, asking around, trying to find out what's going on. And I came across something that might be connected to the people Carl's involved with." My heart raced. "What is it?" Rachel hesitated for a moment before pulling out her phone. She showed me a series of images, grainy photos of what looked like a warehouse, hidden behind a row of abandoned buildings. "I found this online. It's not much, but it's a start. The place has been tied to some unsavory people. And there's one name that keeps coming up." She paused for effect. "Hawthorne." The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. "Hawthorne," I repeated, trying to recall if I'd ever heard of anyone by that name. "Yeah," she said, but I couldn't find much. "It's like they don't want anyone to know about him. Or them. But I think it's connected to Carl. I think they're the ones behind all of this." The weight of her words settled in. Hawthorne. Whoever they were powerful. And if they had something to do with Carl's disappearance and all the strange events that had been happening around me, then I was in much deeper than I had realized. I turned to Rachel, my eyes steely with determination. "We need to go there. We need to find out what's really going on." Rachel's face paled, her fear obvious. "Are you sure? It's dangerous." "I don't care," I said, my voice firm. "I need answers, and I'm not leaving until I get them." The room was thick with tension as we stood there, the air heavy with the weight of what was to come. The truth was out there, buried somewhere beneath all these lies, and I wasn't going to stop until I uncovered it. The first step was the warehouse, and I was going to find out exactly what Hawthorne had to do with it all. I don't know when it started exactly. Maybe it was the way the sun had begun to dip lower in the sky, casting its fading orange light through the half-open window. Maybe it was the silence that had settled too thick, too unnatural. Or maybe it was the way people began to look at me as if they knew something I didn't. Something they weren't telling me. The question had been lingering in the back of my mind all day. Why were they all acting this way? The small, almost imperceptible changes in their behavior, like the way they paused for a second too long before answering, or the way their eyes darted to each other in brief, silent communication. They were always a little off, a little too aware of me, as if there was something hidden in the air between us. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. But what? The sounds around me, too, felt distorted. The hum of the street outside, the rustling of papers on the desk, even the ticking of the clock on the wall seemed more pronounced than usual. It was as though everything around me was gradually becoming louder, more vivid, as if the world was tightening its grip around me. The quiet rustling in the corner of my room, at first just the wind shifting a forgotten piece of paper, now seemed different. My breath quickened as I turned to look. Nothing. But then, a shadow. Just for a moment. It was small, almost imperceptible, but I saw it, right there at the edge of my vision. I froze. Was it just my imagination? Stop it, I whispered to myself. There's nothing there. It's all in your head. But my pulse was racing. I felt it in my chest. The weight of something. The feeling that I wasn't alone, that I hadn't been alone for hours, though I hadn't seen anyone around. I tried to focus, to steady my breath, but the unease was growing. I pushed away from the desk and stood up, my legs a little unsteady. A flicker of movement caught my eye. Again, a shadow. No, it wasn't just a shadow. It was a figure. My mind screamed at me to look away, to move, to leave the room, but my feet were glued to the floor. My thoughts scrambled, trying to find some logical explanation, but none came. Not one single reason that would make any sense. I shook my head, desperate to push the thoughts away. It's just a trick of the light. A reflection. Nothing else, I told myself, forcing a shaky laugh. But the longer I stood there, the more I questioned it. A sudden sound, a soft thud, came from behind me. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest, but again, nothing. Everything was still. Too still. I forced myself to breathe slowly. There had to be a reasonable explanation for this. A draft, a shift in the air. But then a whisper. It was faint, barely audible at first, but unmistakable. A voice, and not just any voice. A voice I recognized. My own. Let's hear. I froze, the blood draining from my face as I stared into the empty space around me. No one was here. No one had spoken. But I had heard it. I was sure of it. Stop, please. It's not real. Just a sound, I mumbled to myself, but even I didn't believe my own words. A cold, creeping chill swept through the room. My skin tightened and my heart thudded louder. I wasn't sure if the world around me had shifted or if it was just my mind slipping. I took a step back. The air felt thick, suffocating. Each step I took felt like I was wading through molasses, slow, laborious, like something was pulling at my every movement. My thoughts were clouded, tangled. And then just as suddenly, the sound stopped. Everything became unnervingly quiet again. But that was the thing. It wasn't the comforting quiet of a peaceful moment. It was the kind of quiet that presses on your chest, that makes you feel like you're being suffocated by it. I shook my head again. It's just the stress. You're imagining it. But the nagging thought didn't leave. Was I imagining it? Or was it something more? Something I was meant to understand but couldn't. Something was coming, and I couldn't make it stop. The next few hours blurred by in a haze of heightened senses and gnawing unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was just out of sight, watching me, waiting for me to slip, to make a mistake. I tried to push the thought away. I had to. It was irrational. People didn't just stare at you like that for no reason. They didn't whisper your name when no one was around. They didn't leave strange, lingering silences in the middle of conversation. But as I moved through my apartment, everything around me seemed off. The walls, once familiar, now felt oppressive. The floorboards creaked under my feet as I walked to the kitchen, but the sound didn't feel right. It felt too deliberate, like someone else was walking just behind me, mimicking my every move. I looked over my shoulder. Nothing. The kitchen was empty, just as it should be. But even as I opened the cabinet to grab a glass, I couldn't shake the feeling that the room itself had changed. It felt colder. The usual warmth of the space was gone, replaced with something sterile, something unfamiliar. I could feel the air thickening around me, and a quiet hum, faint and almost imperceptible, seemed to fill the room. It was a vibration, low and unsettling, almost as though the walls were vibrating with some hidden energy, something I couldn't understand. I took a step back, setting the glass down on the counter. My mind was racing. Why was I so jumpy? I hadn't been this paranoid before. This wasn't like me. I wasn't the kind of person who jumped at every little sound, who imagined threats in every shadow. But now everything was different. Everything felt dangerous. I rubbed my temples, trying to focus. I needed to calm down. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. But then the whispers came again. Faint, almost like a breath, just behind me. My heart skipped a beat and I froze in place. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. My skin tingled, goosebumps rising all over my arms. The words were too soft to make out, but the tone. It was unmistakable. It was my voice, my very own. Turn around, the whisper seemed to beckon. I didn't want to listen. I didn't want to turn around. But my body betrayed me. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, I twisted my neck, looking behind me. There was nothing there. Nothing but the empty kitchen. The soft glow of the refrigerator light. The hum of the fan. But the whispers didn't stop. Now they were closer, almost in my ear, like someone was standing just inches away, their breath hot on my skin. I could almost feel the warmth against my cheek. Turn around, the voice insisted again. It's coming. I spun back around, heart pounding. The kitchen hadn't changed. Nothing had changed. But my mind was slipping. I rushed to the window, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. I needed to see something normal, something real. But the moment I opened it, I felt it. A weight in the air pressing down on me, suffocating me. The world outside was wrong. The street below looked the same, of course. The same buildings, the same cars, the same people walking by in their usual hurry. But the people, their faces, they looked different. Their eyes were too wide, their movements too stiff, too calculated. There was something unnatural about them, like they were pretending to be real. I pulled my head back inside and slammed the window shut. The feeling that something was watching me, waiting for me, grew stronger. I needed to leave. I needed to get out. But I didn't know where to go. Everywhere felt unsafe. I went to the door, but the moment I touched the handle, I heard it again. A low, guttural sound. A shuffle like someone dragging their feet across the floor. I froze. I wasn't alone. The air felt thick, like the space itself was closing in on me. My breath quickened and I felt my heart beat in my throat. I slowly turned around. There in the corner of the hallway, a figure stood in the shadows. It wasn't clear at first, just a silhouette. Tall, thin, unmoving. But then the figure stepped forward, and the dim light revealed something even worse. It wasn't human. The face, if you could even call it that, was a blur of features, like someone had taken a face and tried to smear it into something unrecognizable. Eyes wide, dark, empty, and a mouth twisted into something that shouldn't be possible. I staggered backward, my mind screaming at me to run, to escape, to do anything. But my legs wouldn't move. My body was frozen in place. The figure took a step closer. Another. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like it didn't quite understand how to walk. But its presence filled the room, crowded it, made it impossible to breathe. I could hear its breathing now, heavy, ragged, like it was struggling to find air. But it wasn't the kind of breathing that came from lungs. It was too deep, too hollow. It didn't make sense. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. I blinked, disoriented. My heart was racing, my hands shaking uncontrollably. But when I looked again, the hallway was empty. There was no figure, no shadow, just the same familiar hallway. My mind was playing tricks on me. It had to be. It couldn't be real. I didn't know how much longer I could keep telling myself that. Because somewhere deep inside me, I knew that this, whatever it was, wasn't over. It was just beginning. I couldn't shake it. The feeling, like a dark presence lingering just outside the corner of my vision, was suffocating. Every breath seemed more labored, more desperate, as if the air itself had turned thick and oppressive. I tried to focus, to make sense of what had just happened. The figure wasn't real. I couldn't trust my senses anymore. Maybe I had imagined it, or maybe it had been something else, something my mind couldn't comprehend. But the fear, that was real. The fear was gnawing at me, chewing through my resolve like a relentless predator. I needed to leave. I needed to get out of this place, this room, this mind. But every step I took felt heavier, as though the floor itself was pulling me down, holding me captive in this nightmare of my own making. I grabbed my phone. My fingers fumbled with the screen, shaking too much to type properly. I needed to call someone, anyone. But who? Everyone around me was acting strange. There were no clear answers. No help to be found. Even the simple act of calling for help felt futile, like trying to scream underwater. I took a deep breath, pressing my palm against my forehead, trying to calm the pounding in my temples. My reflection in the window caught my eye. My face was pale, my eyes wide, stricken with terror. And yet there was something else, something beneath the surface. A flicker of recognition. A fleeting memory, distant but undeniable, like I had seen this face before. But where? When? A creep. I froze, my heart jumping into my throat. The noise came from the hallway again. That soft, unsettling creak. It wasn't a simple floorboard settling or the wind shifting. It was deliberate. Slow, intentional. I wasn't alone. I backed away from the window, trying to steady my breath. My eyes darted around the room, searching for anything out of place, anything that could explain what was happening. But the room seemed normal, too normal. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the faint rustling of paper on the table. It all seemed so ordinary, so perfectly mundane. Yet my skin crawled with the sense that something was off. And then the sound came again. Louder this time. A footstep. A slow, deliberate pace, echoing through the walls, growing closer with each passing second. My pulse quickened. The walls seemed to close in, the ceiling pressing lower with every breath. I knew I should move, should run. But my body refused to obey. I was frozen, drugged, as if something or someone was keeping me in place. The door, the exit, it was right there, but I couldn't reach it. The distance seemed to stretch, to lengthen unnaturally. Every step felt like it would take me farther from the door, farther from safety. And then I heard it, a voice. Low, almost a whisper. You're not going anywhere. I jerked around, heart hammering in my chest, eyes searching frantically. But the room was empty. The space I had once known so well now felt foreign, hostile. The air was thick with tension, and the shadows seemed to move, shifting with purpose, as if they were alive. My mind scrambled for logic. There had to be a reasonable explanation. There had to be. But as I looked around, the world seemed to unravel, the edges of reality blurring into something darker. Something more dangerous. I turned toward the hallway, and that's when I saw it. A figure stood in the doorway, partially obscured by the dim light. A shadow. No, this time it wasn't a shadow. It was real. The figure was tall, impossibly so, its limbs too long, too thin. Its face a twisted mask, devoid of emotion, just hollow eyes and a jagged mouth, grinning as if it knew something I didn't. The smile stretched unnaturally wide, splitting the face in half. The skin was pale, sickly, like it hadn't seen the light of day in years. I took a step back, my legs shaking, my breath catching in my throat. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. The figure's eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment I felt an overwhelming sense of recognition. I had seen this face before, hadn't I? No, it couldn't be. It wasn't possible. The figure took a step forward, its movements slow but deliberate, its gaze never leaving me. I felt an icy chill spread through my chest, a weight pressing down on my chest, as if the very air was thickening, suffocating me. I opened my mouth to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. My voice was trapped somewhere inside me, struggling to break free. Another step. Closer. The figure's smile widened. You're too late, it said, its voice a guttural rasp, like it hadn't spoken in years. The words crawled into my ears, scratching at my sanity. It's already begun. Panic surged through me. I had to run. I had to get out of there. But before I could move, before I could even think, the room went dark. The lights flickered once, then twice, before they went out entirely. The darkness wasn't the usual kind, it felt. Alive. The shadows pressed in from all sides, enveloping me, and the air became thick with an unnatural cold, like I was standing in the middle of a graveyard, surrounded by unseen eyes. I heard footsteps again. They were everywhere now. Close. I could feel them moving around me, circling me, watching me. And then the whisper. It was in my ear now, so close that I could feel its breath on my neck. You can't escape, it said, its voice a rasping, mocking tone. Not this time. I turned, trying to run, but my feet wouldn't move. My body refused to cooperate, frozen in place by an unseen force. I closed my eyes, my body trembling, my thoughts spinning in a whirlwind of panic. Was this real? Was I losing my mind? And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the darkness lifted. The lights flickered back on. The room returned to normal. The figure was gone, but the whispers remained. I staggered back, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. My legs shook, and I had to lean against the wall for support. It had been a hallucination. It had to have been. But as I stood there trembling, I realized one terrifying truth. It wasn't over. It had just begun. The silence that followed was almost worse than the chaos. I stood in the center of the room, trembling, heart racing, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The shadows seemed to press in around me, like they were waiting, biding their time. I felt their weight on my shoulders, crushing me, suffocating me. I wanted to scream, to call out, but my voice caught in my throat, like it had been stolen away by the very darkness that filled the room. I took a slow step backward, my mind still struggling to piece together what had just happened. The figure, the whisper, it felt real, so real. But it couldn't be. It just couldn't be. Could it? I felt a rush of coldness spread through my chest, as if the temperature had dropped by several degrees in the blink of an eye. The hairs on my neck stood up. I wasn't alone. I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching me. I had to leave. I had to get out of this apartment, away from whatever this was. The walls felt like they were closing in. The air was thick, pressing in on me, as if the whole world were closing in on my every move. I reached for the door again, fingers shaking, my thoughts racing in a spiral of fear and confusion. But when my hand gripped the doorknob, a voice stopped me cold. "Don't go," it whispered. The voice was familiar, but it wasn't mine. It wasn't anyone I knew. It was something else. A presence. A force. I spun around, my pulse pounding in my ears. But the room was empty. The same familiar space I had known so well. The same kitchen, the same worn couch, the same half-empty bookshelf. Everything was as it should be, but it was wrong. It was so wrong. I wasn't sure what to do anymore. My mind was unraveling, and I could feel the tendrils of panic creeping in. I had to leave. I had to escape. But every step felt like it would take me farther from something I didn't understand, something that was waiting for me, hiding just out of reach. The thought of leaving the apartment felt like stepping into a void. I tried to steady myself, telling myself it was just the stress. It was just the exhaustion, the isolation. It had to be. But then there was a sound. A soft scraping, as though something sharp was dragging across the floor. I froze. It was coming from the hallway again. The noise was too faint to be footsteps, too deliberate to be wind. It was as though someone or something was moving slowly, carefully, just out of view. My breath hitched in my chest, and I took a hesitant step back, my eyes darting toward the darkened hallway. I couldn't see anything, but the air felt thicker, denser. I could feel it pressing down on me, like invisible hands reaching out to grab me. I needed to see what it was. I needed to know what was happening to me. I forced myself to move, though every part of me screamed to run. I couldn't let whatever it was have control over me. I took a few cautious steps down the hallway, the sound of my feet on the floor loud in the silence. I reached the end, my eyes scanning the shadows. The door to my bedroom stood ajar, the faintest crack of light spilling into the dark corridor. And then I saw it. A figure stood in the doorway of the bedroom. Dull, then, its back was to me, but I could see the outline of its body, the unnatural shape of its limbs. The figure was perfectly still, as if it was waiting, watching, aware of my every move. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened and my mind screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, my body locked in place by an invisible force. The figure slowly turned its head, just enough that I could see its face, if you could even call it a face. The skin was gray, sickly, stretched tight over a skull-like structure. Its eyes were wide, unblinking, dark pits that seemed to swallow the light around them. Its mouth opened slowly and a sound escaped, an inhuman rasp like the scraping of bone against bone. "Come closer," it whispered, the voice soft but carrying a weight of pure malice. I shook my head, backing away, my legs trembling. I couldn't understand. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But the terror that washed over me, the raw, primal fear, told me otherwise. I wasn't just afraid, I was losing my grip on reality. I turned to run, but before I could move, the figure stepped forward. One step, and then impossibly it was right in front of me, its face inches from mine. I could feel its cold breath against my skin, the air thick with its presence. "You've seen too much," it said, its voice a soft hiss. "You can't leave now." The words sent a chill down my spine, and I realized with sickening clarity that this wasn't just a hallucination. It was real. And whatever it was, whatever was behind it, it wasn't going to let me go. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest. But the figure didn't move. It stayed unmoving like a statue, watching me with those hollow eyes. I could hear my own pulse in my ears, the pounding rhythm matching the chaos in my mind. I had no escape. There was no way out. "Why?" I gasped, my voice trembling with fear. "Because it's already too late," the figure replied, its smile widening, stretching unnaturally wide, its mouth splitting in two. "You've been marked. There's no going back." The weight of its words hit me like a blow to the stomach. I felt the air leave my lungs. My vision blurred, and for a moment I couldn't tell where I was, if I was even awake. My mind was spinning, and I fought to hold on to something, anything that made sense. But there was nothing. The world had become a twisted, chaotic nightmare. The walls seemed to shift, the light flickering in and out, and the shadows, those damn shadows, seemed to grow longer, darker, stretching to consume me. I opened my mouth to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. I was trapped. The figure took a step closer, and everything went black. I woke up, or at least I thought I did. It wasn't a smooth transition from unconsciousness to awareness. It wasn't a gentle return to the world I had known. No, it felt as if I had been ripped from one place and thrust into another, my body disoriented, my mind struggling to grasp reality. The first thing I noticed was the cold, an unnatural, biting cold that seeped through my clothes, making my skin crawl. It wasn't just a chill. It was something deeper, something wrong. I blinked rapidly, trying to adjust my vision, but the darkness around me was all-encompassing. My surroundings were unfamiliar, alien. I wasn't in my apartment anymore. I wasn't even sure if I was in the same world. The space around me was vast and empty, the air thick with the weight of silence. The walls, or whatever they were made of something smooth and featureless, stretching impossibly high above me, disappearing into the void. There was no door, no window, no way out. I reached out instinctively, my fingers brushing against the cold, featureless surface. My heart raced as I realized that the walls were alive. They weren't made of solid material. They pulsed like they were breathing, like they were part of something much larger, something sentient. I tried to move, but my body refused to obey. My legs were weak, trembling beneath me, as if the very act of standing required more energy than I had left. Panic began to creep in again, slowly at first, and then all at once. I had to find a way out. I had to get away from whatever this place was, whatever this thing was that had brought me here. But just as I thought I might collapse, something else shifted in the air. A presence as if the very atmosphere had changed. I turned my head quickly, my eyes scanning the empty space. And then I heard it, the softest sound, barely audible over the pounding of my heart. A whisper. It was faint, like a breath against my ear, but it sent a shock of ice through me. The voice was the same, the one I had heard before, the one that had said, "You've seen too much." "You can't leave," it whispered again, its voice echoing in the vast, empty space. It was everywhere and nowhere at once, as if it were coming from all directions, pressing in on me from all sides. I clenched my fists, my mind racing. This can't be happening. This isn't real. But the fear was too real. It clawed at me, sinking its claws deeper and deeper into my psyche. I tried to take a step, but the ground beneath me shifted, buckling and warping in a sickening ripple. It was as if the very fabric of this place was alive, twisting and contorting in response to my movements. The walls began to tremble, a low, groaning sound echoing through the vast emptiness, as if the space itself was awakening. The whispers grew louder, the voices multiplying, overlapping in a maddening cacophony. "You're not supposed to be here," one voice hissed, its tone dripping with malice. "You can't undo what's been done," another voice murmured, colder than ice. "There's no way out," a third voice joined in, its words slow and deliberate, as though savoring each syllable. The words tangled together, growing louder, suffocating me. I pressed my hands to my ears, desperate to block out the noise, but it didn't help. It wasn't in my ears, it was in my mind, crawling beneath my skin, twisting through my thoughts like a poison. I could feel something else now, something shifting in the air around me. It wasn't just the voices, it was the very weight of this place. The walls pulsed again, and this time the pulse felt like it was reaching into me, pulling at something deep inside. I need to get out. The thought repeated in my mind like a mantra, but it felt hollow, meaningless. I couldn't escape. I stumbled forward, my legs still weak, my body moving on pure instinct, propelled by the overwhelming urge to flee. The darkness seemed to stretch out before me, endless, suffocating. The space around me began to close in, the walls contracting, forcing me into a smaller and smaller area. And then I saw it. A figure. It was standing in the distance, barely visible in the gloom, its shape indistinct, like a shadow made of smoke. It was tall, taller than any human, and its outline shimmered as though it was flickering in and out of existence. It didn't move, didn't react to my presence. It just stood there, waiting. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I felt a wave of recognition hit me. This was the same figure. The one from my apartment. The one that had whispered to me. The one that had taken me. I felt my stomach twist. No. No. I tried to turn, to run in the opposite direction, but my feet were frozen. The figure was getting closer now, its form sharpening, becoming more solid with each passing second. The space around me seemed to ripple and bend, distorting as it approached. You shouldn't have come here, the figure spoke, its voice low and hollow, like the sound of wind through dead trees. You can't leave now. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my heart thumping painfully in my chest. It was all too much. Too much to process, too much to understand. I had to do something. Anything. Why? I rasped, my voice trembling. What do you want from me? The figure didn't answer right away. It just stood there, its shape shifting, flickering in and out like a mirage. And then, just as I thought I might break, it finally spoke again. It's too late. The words sent a shock through me, a sudden, overwhelming wave of despair crashing over my mind. It was as if the very air around me had changed, thickening, suffocating me with the weight of its meaning. I wanted to scream, to fight, to run, but there was nowhere to go. This place, this nightmare, had no boundaries, no exits. It was endless, all-encompassing, like a cage made of darkness and fear. The figure took another step forward, and with it, everything around me seemed to collapse. The walls, the shadows, the very space I had been in, all of it folded in on itself, compressing, crushing me under the weight of something that could not be named. And in that moment, I understood. There was no escape. There was only this suffocating, all-consuming void where time had no meaning and the shadows never stopped watching. I had crossed a line, and now I was trapped in a world of my own making. And it was just the beginning. Thank you for listening till the end. I hope you were able to relax and will now get a good rest. And don't worry, new stories are already on the way for tomorrow, so don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to stay connected. Now have a good night. See you in the next episode.